Hi everybody. Oh, an audience. Welcome, and look, it's wonderful to see so many of you. We had huge interest in our hot topic this afternoon, which is fantastic, and it's great that you guys have made it here through the traffic and long days and your work day and things like that, but it's lovely to see you. I'm Mark Bowie. I'm the Director of Palliative Medicine here at St Vincent's, but also one of the Co-Deputy Directors of the Centre for Palliative Care. And I think it's important that we, again, think about the traditional owners and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on this afternoon, the people, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And we pay our respects past and to those of past, present and emerging elders, and also to those of you of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage and background who are with us today. Obviously our speaker, Nicole, who is an Aboriginal woman and a Maltese woman, and she'll explain a little bit more of that in a minute. She's an independent, self-employed person who really focuses on providing consultancy around these areas of organisations of business in terms of building capacity and capability for people and understanding of cultural safety and so forth in workplaces, environments, schools, places like here where we're working. I think I love this for Nicole. Her main objective is to make a difference. So that's great, isn't it? Because I think that's a really great place to be, but a significant difference in helping people and to make a difference in that space. And obviously the space sits very comfortably with her around speaking to the cultural and practical realities of life, death and life for Aboriginal people. So thank you, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'd like to begin also by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm being invited to speak on today. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the Kulin Nation, past, present and emerging. Nyata, Nyatu, Nyat, Linyung. Hello, my name is Nicole, and that is spoken in my Gundi Jamara language. I'm a Gundi Jamara, a Watchabalak and a Maltese lady, and been working in the field of Aboriginal affairs for over 25 years, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of the some of my understanding and awarenesses and experiences, but also some of those that I've learnt about other Aboriginal peoples, cultures, Torres Strait Islander people and people not from Victoria. So hopefully that's what I'll share with you today. Okay. So I wanted just to start this afternoon just by talking a little bit about what it means to be Aboriginal. If you asked every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person in Australia, what does it mean? You will get over 660,000 different responses, because it means different things to different people. And hopefully today that will help you also understand some of the insights into our end-of-life journey and our concepts of spirituality as well. So Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people make up over 250 different language groups across the country, and we spoke over 700 different dialects of language. Why is this important? Because within these differences, we had different dreamings, which means we have different creator spirits, which means we have different song lines that inform different beliefs. And I can give you a little bit of an example of how different and how close but different we are. So I mentioned I'm a Gundi Jamara and Watchabalak woman. My creator spirit is Bujbim. You would have heard of Bunjil, who's the Kulin Nation's creator spirit. So the Gundi Jamara people are sort of the Warrnambool area is my family's area. So we're talking, 300-400 kilometres away, and we have different creator spirits, different gods. My partner, he's a Yorta Yorta man, his family's from Echuca, up over the Murray, and their creator spirit is Bayami. So, just within Victoria, we've got 3 different gods that I can name, not to mention all of the other creator spirits across the country. That means we've got different dreamings, different lore, L-O-R-E, which means we'll have different beliefs and different stories. It also informs our spiritual practices, our cultural practices, and I guess the narrative of how we also would live our lives as well. It is important to know that when it comes to being Aboriginal, even within one family, there are a lot of differences. And in 2019, what does it mean to be Aboriginal? Or what is an Aboriginal person? Who is an Aboriginal person? Are Aboriginal people just Aboriginal? Yes, no, maybe? Again, there is no straight answer. It's about saying, or it's about understanding what people's beliefs are and where those beliefs are formed from. Our spirit, depending on where we're from as well, will be drawn to we'll have a different pull, we'll draw to different areas of the land. For example, you will either have a spirit that will be drawn to fresh water, salt water, the desert, the bush or the rainforest. My spirit is a freshwater spirit, and that's because my Watchabaluk and my Gunditjmara country are freshwater countries, the part that my family are from. However, the Gunditjmara country is also saltwater country, and so there's an element of a secondary drawing to that. What does that mean from a spirituality perspective? It means that freshwater or lands around freshwater are spiritually healing for me. The rivers, the lakes, the creeks, the dams, it doesn't matter that it's not my river, not my fresh water, it just matters that it's fresh water. And with fresh water, there are similar trees that grow, similar fish, similar animals that live around it, if that kind of makes sense. So whilst, we're on the Kulin Nation and this is both freshwater and saltwater country, we're pretty close to the saltwater country at the moment with the river, the Yarra. What does that mean? It means, as a Gunditjmara person, if I was feeling unwell, my spirit was feeling a bit unwell, a little bit sick, it means that I just need to go be near fresh water. I need to be near, I need to be on that land. I need to connect with the ancestral spirits of those land who will give me a spiritual rejuvenation. And I can't tell you how that happens, I can just tell you that it happens. And what I do know is that it's every person has it within them, not just Aboriginal people, but it's something we're taught about from a very young age, something we're taught to connect with, and something that, we're taught the importance of. So when people talk about our connection to the land, it's not just the land mass or the area of land, it's also the spirits that are being left behind throughout bits of that land, if that makes sense as well. So some people would have seen this map. This map represents the diversity across Aboriginal Australia, the diversity that I've just been talking a little bit about. And probably a couple of other things here that's really important to point out is that our boundaries, they don't naturally sit within the Federation boundaries of Australia. So there are Aboriginal people who may not refer to themselves as, say, being Victorian or South Australian. They may refer to themselves as being Gunditjmara, because the border of that can cross across the Australian borders, if that makes sense. The other thing it's really important to understand is that there are some people who will say they're not Aboriginal, and they'll actually say they're Gunditjmara or Watchabaluk, so they won't use the common generic universal term that's been introduced, because it's not our term, it's a Latin term. And so some people say, I'm not Aboriginal, I'm a Gunditjmara woman. And also the other thing that's really important with regards to this understanding is not all Aboriginal people will see themselves as Australian first. They'll see themselves as Aboriginal and then Australian, because that's sort of what was here, and then Australia came. So there isn't one way that it means to be Aboriginal or how people's Aboriginality is represented. What it is a story, and it's their story. And it is really important that when you're working with Aboriginal people, particularly around the end of life, that you actually understand their story, because where they come from will actually be a big part of the chapter being written about where they're heading. And it is really, really important to have those conversations. The other thing that is really, really important that makes us who we are, or makes being Aboriginal important, are all of the items represented in this model. Talked about country. Country informs our identity. And with our identity, we know where we belong, what families we belong to, what communities we belong to. And with that, there is a past, there's a story, the family history. What is the story of our family? A lot of people you talk to will know their family history really well, maybe 6 generations, 7 generations back, some all the way to an apical ancestor if they're lucky. Many Aboriginal people won't have that luxury, because many Aboriginal people are being removed and never found their way home, which means they've never actually found that personal identity, who their family is, what community they belong to. They're uncertain about the history and their history and what that means, which means their connections may not be as strong, which means being Aboriginal and what culture means to them might be a bit different to someone who's grown up with their family being connected their whole life, knowing their totems, knowing sacred sites, knowing the laws, hearing the stories. Many Aboriginal people will have requests about things that are symbolic to them when they're passing. There'll be many Aboriginal people and families that'll talk about not just photos and pictures, but there'll be people who can't go home for whatever reason. They might not be well enough to make a trip. Home might be too far, or it might be unrealistic for them to actually get there and have the supports they need to be able to care for them once they arrive. So they may request things that are symbolic from their communities. Things like a branch off a tree that maybe they were birthed under. Maybe a jar of water from the river or the ocean from the communities that they lived in. If they're from desert, they may request some sand to be brought down. A little bit similar to, when my nana, my Maltese nana, was unwell and she couldn't make it to the church religiously. She would go to church and she couldn't make it because she broke her hip falling on a bus going to church, and she requested holy water to be brought out so she could do those things in her home. Not dissimilar to that, but requests that you might not be familiar with, like getting a priest to bring some holy water in. If you get these requests, what do you do with it? You have a conversation with the family about how you go about that, around what does that mean. And it's not about just going and breaking a branch off somewhere or filling up a jar with some dirt. There are protocols you have to go through to also move country from one part of the nation to another part. It's against our law to take bits of Wurundjeri into Boomerang's country without permission, or without, say, that piece of land or object being blessed is probably a way to explain it that people would understand. So there will be a lot of requests around things that are symbolic. The other thing is that people may request to see people, and seeing people may equate to 30, 40 people at a time, at any one time. So when we have things that are culturally symbolic to us, they're not just things like the flag, a photo, a picture. They may be about people who may not be the immediate relative, but to that person is more of an immediate relative than some of their blood family are. These are some of the things that are really important in giving an Aboriginal person some dignity in dying. The other things there, the cultural expression and events and the values, beliefs and practices, they're just things to be mindful of. They're part of the conversation that people need to have with the family. With regards to events and expressions, that might be preparing for end of life, as in for the services, the funeral, the cremation, the burials, that kind of stuff. They might be part of the conversations. It may be about having a conversation where that person will be laid to rest. And is there a particular protocol or ritual that needs to be considered in doing that? What it means to be Aboriginal is a conversation you need to have with that individual, because there isn't one Aboriginal person that's the same, and there won't be in the way that they choose to go through their end-of-life journeys, if that's something that they have some luxury in having, considering we have a lot of sudden deaths and that in our communities and families as well. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about the definition of health. You can see up there are 4 different definitions of health, but the one that I want to point out is the Indigenous definition. And it talks about Aboriginal health means not just the physical well-being of an individual, but refers to the social, emotional and cultural well-being of the whole community, in which each individual is able to achieve their full potential as a human being, thereby bringing about the total well-being of their community. It is a whole of life view and includes the cyclical concept of life, death, life. What does that mean? It means when an Aboriginal person is born, one of the things we know is inevitable is that we're going to die. Being born, dying and then being reborn is a big part of our spirituality and our belief system, and it's more around the spirit. So when an Aboriginal person's born, they inherit a spirit from the dreaming, just like you might inherit a soul, if that makes sense. And our spirit, it borrows our body while we walk on this earth. But when we pass, our spirit returns to the dreaming, and that spirit then will be, replaced or revived in another body when that's born. So often the spirits that walk within us are spirits that have walked in many of us before. And people will point out things like, you've got an old man spirit, or you've got an old woman spirit. You got a spirit like your nana. You got a strong fighting spirit. You got a warrior spirit. You'll hear people talking about the spirit, and that's what they're referring to. What we've got from the dreaming that we've got until we die, and that spirit returns. Why is the definition of health also important? Because it demonstrates our understanding of social and emotional well-being, which is more of a psychosocial approach than the biomedical approach to well-being. And I put this car up. I'm going to give you a little analogy that will help you understand social and emotional well-being in Aboriginal people. So we're going to look at this car, and for the sake of the analogy, the make of this car is an Aboriginal car. We know there are over 660,000 of these Aboriginal cars on the road, and we know there are over 250 different models out there of this car. I can tell you in Victoria we've probably got about 60-odd thousand Aboriginal cars registered here. About 50% of those cars are under 18, so they're pretty new cars on the road, they're pretty young cars. The other 50% are over 18. I can tell you that 50% of those cars registered in Victoria are registered to the metropolitan area. The other 50% are registered to addresses in the rural regions. Now, what's important about these Aboriginal cars is every car needs a checkup. Every car needs to visit a mechanic regularly. But there are many Aboriginal cars that don't visit the mechanic regularly and often will come in on the back of a tow truck at the crisis end of their wear and tear. So what's important to understand to help those cars come in a bit more regularly, or when they do come in, how is the way we respond to what are the needs of that car's, either their general mechanical needs or their specialist mechanical needs. And a good indication are the 4 tyres. I want you to think about the 4 tyres being or representing social, emotional, physical and cultural well-being. Generally, if a car is being brought on the tow truck into the hospital, I'd be saying that pretty much its physical tyre is punctured, most likely, yeah? So what will happen is we'll work on replacing and fixing that puncture. But what's important is, whilst it may not be our job to do so, it is important that we have a conversation about how much air is in those other tyres. Because it's the deflation in the cultural, social and emotional bits that might be making the physical tyre keep puncturing to remain with a slow leak and never repair itself. Excuse me. So it's important to know that what's your role in fixing a car? Are you the mechanic? Are you the specialist mechanic? Are you the person that goes and talks to the family about the diagnosis of the mechanic and how much it's going to cost, and what things we can do first, what needs to be immediately responded to and what can wait a couple of months? It's about knowing what part of the car it's your role in making better, and knowing that a no wrong door approach to a sick car coming in is about saying, unfortunately, Nicole, your radiator's busted. We can't fix radiators here. We've got a specialist radiator place up the road. We can do your referral there. Might take a couple of weeks to get in, but if you keep driving with your busted radiator, you're going to blow your engine. And if you blow your engine, no more car. So I guess where I'm going, when you're thinking about well-being, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and you're thinking about that holistic approach and what does that mean, that's what it means. It means just not checking the air in your tyre. It means checking the air in the other tyres, and that is, again, it's part of a person's story. How much of that story they tell you will vary, because that will also depend on the trust and the safety they feel in the room. So, end of life, returning to the dreaming. It's the preference of words that we use will be determined by the audience we're in. In an audience like this, I'd be using death and dying a lot more because it's the words you understand. In my community, I wouldn't use death and dying as much. I'd be using words, they passed away, they've passed, they've gone back to the dreaming, they've entered the dreaming, they're on their end of life journey, that sort of stuff. It's not necessarily one size fits all. There are people who are comfortable with using the term death and dying, and there are some people that aren't. What I sort of would suggest here is that people just be guided by the conversation. It's just listening to the words that the individual and the family are using, and if you're not sure what it is, seek clarity. So Nicole, when you talk about end of life, are you actually talking about dying? Yes, that's what I'm talking about. That's my word to describe it. Okay, words will be used that we will understand that you may not understand, but they may mean things that you will definitely know about. Okay, so it is important to just know and be mindful of language. Talking about death and dying, like I mentioned a bit earlier, one of the things we know as an Aboriginal people, it's inevitable. If you're born, you're going to die. And whilst it's not something we talk about at the dinner table every night, we have so much death occurring in our communities, in our families, that it's something that you have to think about. And even if you haven't talked about it, you would have thought about it at some stage. And when I say thought about it, not dying, when am I going to die, but about the end of life stuff, because you're facing that so much. And I can give you an example. So today, it's actually my sister's birthday today, and my sister passed away 14 years ago, 2 weeks before her 22nd birthday. So today she would have been 36. And when she passed, I'm the eldest in my family, and even though my mum's still alive and her dad's still alive, I was basically given the responsibility of doing the funeral arrangements. So I think I was 30 at the time. I might have been 29, 30 at the time. And I was delegating all of the different things to the family members, and, you know, this person will arrange the pastor and that person will arrange the venue. And I started going through my sister's stuff because, you know, I'd always wanted to go through her stuff, you know, and here was an opportunity, even though I knew somehow she was sort of watching me. And my mum come in, she's like, you know, don't pack her stuff up yet. And I'm like, no, I'm not, Mum. I'm just sort of having a look. I wanted to see if she knew she was sick, and because if she did, she didn't tell us. And her death was unexpected, very unexpected. And I found a book in her drawer, and I went through the book, and it was kind of like a journal, like her journal book, a book she'd had over a few years, and she'd had all this stuff in it like 20-year-olds do, and there was stuff there from, I think, when she was about 19. But I come across a page, and there was a page, and it was all about, when I die, this is the plans for my funeral. And I just stopped, and I'm like, I didn't even, like, I know she thought about, like, because we all do. We all think about where we're going to be buried, where going home is, that sort of stuff. But she planned it out to the 4 songs she wanted to play, to one of her friends, my partner's cousin, that she wanted to come and sing one of the particular songs because she sang it so beautiful at our cousin's funeral. She wanted to the pastor or whoever was doing, you know, I don't know if you call it emceeing, but the person at the front, she wanted that person to tell everybody that she understood how many funerals we went to and how many hours that equated in standing time. And she actually said, I don't want anyone to stand for anything except the final prayer when they carry my coffin out. She put so much thought into it that I had to go and pull everyone's delegations back, which is a bit okay, because my brother at the time, who was 18, he had the music, the songs, and I was a bit afraid he was going to do the doof stuff, you know. Yeah. So it was really, I mean, it was unexpected, but I tell you, it was a weight lifted off my shoulders, because whilst I knew where she wanted to be buried, in the cemetery, which cemetery, we'd already talked about where our family's going, and at that time my son was, I think he was about 10 or something, and he even said, when I die, Mum, I want to be buried next to Auntie Leanie. And I had to say to him, mate, this is kind of a cemetery that's first in best dress, so I'm not sure that spot's going to be available, and it's not. My auntie took it. About a year or so ago. So, but where I'm going with that, it's about being mindful that whilst it's a difficult subject to talk about, it is something that many Aboriginal families would have spoke about with regards to final request and final resting place. Maybe songs, maybe pastors, you know, don't do no religious stuff. You know, my partner said graveside stuff, you know, again, with regards to people have to go from the Advancement League in Thornbury and drive all the way then out to the cemetery, which is about 40 minutes, and everyone gets lost and late. And so he's like, no, I don't want all of that fuss. And so where I'm going with this is, it is important that you know that our people will be quite confident, if they haven't had the conversation, how to have the conversation. Okay, so when somebody becomes palliative, and I've talked about some of these requests, the cultural requests, but some of the other requests that people might get asked to support with our religious requests. There are many Aboriginal people also have faith and different faiths. There are a lot of Aboriginal Muslim people, a lot of Aboriginal Christians, Aboriginal Orthodox. There are a lot of different Aboriginal people who practice different religions, and so that might be some of the request. They might have requests around the legality around death and dying. A lot of people, Aboriginal people, actually don't realise that having a will doesn't come into effect until you die. So a lot of people will have some written instruction in a will that they believe the family will be guided by during an end-of-life journey. Talk to them about the advanced care plan stuff, talk to them about seeing a lawyer, and talk to them about family representation and spokespeople. It is important that to consider the request for an Aboriginal person dying is not just all the cultural stuff, but it's also all the other stuff. And one of my little tips is to be mindful of what they're not asking for. If they're confident in asking for the cultural stuff, then give them the support or create the space to have the conversation to talk about the other things. They may not just know. And there are many ways you can give an individual cultural dignity when they're preparing for their end of life. Again, it's a conversation with that individual. It'd be, one of my tips is that when someone becomes sick and they know they're terminally unwell, is to have those conversations earlier rather than later. Like I said, they've already thought about it. They've probably already told their kids, you know, I'm going here, this is how it's going to be, that sort of stuff. So make sure that it is something that they are part of leading the decisions about. That's the best way to give an individual dignity in dying, is allowing them to be part of that decision-making process in what happens in their end-of-life journey. Again, if it's not reasonable, their request and or some of the ideas they come up with, then have that conversation with the family and ask the family, are they able to have that conversation with the individual, or do they also need that support to do that? Because cultural obligation can be a pretty big thing, and it can weigh pretty much, particularly on family, if they've got somebody who's older than them who's about to pass. And on that note, I would like to say thank you and open up for questions.
Thank you, Nicole. It's left us with plenty of time, which was great to have a bit of a dialogue and a discussion. I think there are a couple of microphones floating, but just speak fairly loudly and crisply into the microphone so our camera guy can pick it up here with the recording today, so thank you.
I probably can...
And I can repeat them if you like. How does that sound? That's me. That's working.
No, it is a little bit. It's a little bit. Yeah, nice and close. Thanks, Hi, thanks Nicole very much for enlightening some of us at least in the room. One of the things about that end of life discussion and the way that our hospitals and the structures that we have in them, say small rooms and things like that, is there sort of any strategies in place when, you know, large families are wanting to gather that are alternatives to perhaps, you know, hospital rooms, or anything that you have tips on?
Again, it depends on the hospital, but I've had a lot of experience where hospitals have created, well, not created, but they've had a waiting area that they've closed off to the entire public and given that waiting area to the family, because it will often have couches and chairs, a TV, some water facilities and a toilet and stuff right next to it. Depending on the season and, you know, obviously, and where you are as well. For example, having places like the parks and that across the road are often great places, but again, that depends on weather and things like that. Alternatively, a lot of people will just gather at one or two of the houses, of the family members' houses and things like that. So the option may be that the conversation's in the house, where that can accommodate a large family if a hospital couldn't. Yeah.
Are there any differences between children and adults? I work with children, so...
Absolutely. So with the children, again, age appropriate, just depending. They might have certain requests that the parents might speak to them about. In an age appropriate conversation, they may not say, "You're going to die, what would you like?" They might talk about, you know, there's a special time that's going to come for you soon where we get to celebrate your life, and you know, what are some of the things that you love in life, or that you've enjoyed, or that you think were important. So they, again, depending on the age, there are conversations you would have with the child, but it would be more looking at the things that they enjoyed, the things that made them happy, because it's sad enough to bury a child. So at a children's funeral, you want to focus on all of the really, really good things and the things that make your heart flutter. And so I'd be just saying, yeah, depending on age, if you're talking infants or you know, babies that might be stillborn or things like that, if you're talking about deaf and stuff like that, then that's a conversation with the parents, obviously, yeah. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, with adolescents, I should say, with adolescents, I'd be asking them, you know, if there's an adolescent, they would like to speak to someone alone as well, without family around and things like that, giving them a few different options. Again, you know, the emotions of family in the room with young people who are on the end of life journey can sometimes hijack the things that they want to know about and things like that. So, you know, my experience is making sure they've got an opportunity to have their space. Yeah.
Just one I've got, Nicole, just in terms of traditional sort of health or traditional healers, is there much visibility in particularly maybe in the Victorian or the communities of Victoria? It's something you tend to focus on away in the more remote areas of Australia, but is that something that sort of slips under the radar?
So I've worked in health for a very, very long time, and it's a conversation we often have. One of the things that we know we have in Victoria are cultural healers, but they're not people who would refer to themselves as a cultural healer. And often when you'd say, "Arnie, you know, you're like a cultural healer for me, because the way you listen to the story and the way you tell the story, but then the way you lead our community, like you make us well again." And so there are what I would call, and what many other Aboriginal people would refer to as, they are a healer, but more of a spiritual healer. And I guess there's many of our people who have used the, I'm not going to get the name right, but the healers from South Australia. There's been many a time that they've gone through, sorry? Nuncaries, that's it. All I could think of was Nunkamura Nuti, which is the Aboriginal Health Service, who generally you'd make those requests through. But yeah, so often we've invited healers, but you've also got to remember not every Aboriginal person in Victoria is an Aboriginal Victorian person. So they may need their own healer, and if they can't go home, that might be one of the requests, you know, and they're referred to different titles in different places, if that makes sense. I know up North Queensland they call them, some communities refer to them as a witch doctor. In other places they'll call them a medicine man. In other places they'll call them a healer. So it just varies, and again, it's a conversation with that person.
Nicole, you mentioned that Aboriginal people have different religions. So when they pass away, how are the burials done? Is it in a cultural way, religious way, or a combination of both?
It's the last answer, it's the latter. It's a bit of both, it can be. And again, it depends where you're from and where you will be, where your final resting place will be. There are some Aboriginal practices that are about burial. There are some about cremation. There are some that are driven by religion, and then there are some that are driven by ceremonial law and things like that. Again, it depends on your individual belief system. What I can say is that many Aboriginal people of Victoria have adopted a Christian way of I guess, their end of life, their funeral and things like that, where we'd come together, have a service, you might say some prayers, you might sing some songs, there'll be some storytelling, that sort of stuff. Then it would be a cremation or a burial, and then we'd go back and we'd all have a big feed sort of thing, so like a wake. And so that practice is very common in Victoria, but again, you have a lot of people in Victoria not from Victoria. So there might be things that they do a bit differently, or they might ask to go home. And that means if they need to go home, it's one, arrange transport of the body back, but it's another thing to ensure there's someone back home doing all the things that they need to do. I've got some friends who are from up north, and they've got like a 10-day ceremonial process that goes through when somebody dies, and they cover the body with leaves on the beach and things like that, and it's all part of that spirit returning and things like that. And then there's another friend I've got, and his family are from South Australia, and what they have is a dual mourning process. So they go through the original mourning process at the time of the cremation, that was a cremation, and then they wait 6 months, and then they spread the ashes. They have to wait 6 months. So when they spread the ashes, they go through a secondary mourning process as well. So again, there isn't one answer. Some people have no culture and no faith, but will be Aboriginal. So again, there isn't one answer for that, but some might be one, the other, or a combination, or neither.
Sort of medical intervention that can happen at end of life, and you see some people who are on dialysis and very young. So is there a sort of attitude towards medical intervention that
not no different than you would have come across with other people? So you're talking about cancer, we've got people who will try every single treatment possible. Then we've got people who will say, I don't want the treatment because I want to live my life and I want to be here for it and present, and I want to play with my grandkids, and so it will vary. However, if there's you sort of come to a point where somebody really needs something, it's a conversation I'd be having with the family. One of the things that Aboriginal people are pretty good at doing is compromising and doing that non-linear kind of negotiation. Let me just get some sand from, up bush there, bring that back. If they come and they put that and I put my toes in and it doesn't make me feel better, I might take your medicine. Yeah, so sometimes that's, and it might be the opposite way around. Look, if you don't want to try this treatment, how about I support you to do some cultural healing, some spiritual healing? If that doesn't work, come back, we have a conversation, and maybe you'll think about this. Does that, yeah? So wouldn't be that dissimilar to other people in how they decide whether they're going to engage with treatments and medicines and things like that. The other factor, I guess, is the financial aspect of it, and can people actually afford the medication they need to remain well. Yeah.
Any other question? Talking to the light there, sorry. Any other questions? I've just got one more. As we know, we hope, and most people hope to die at home or in their own community, but the majority of people, as we know, in the palliative care sector die in hospitals. Mm-hmm. Do you feel hospitals are being more sensitive to some of the cultural aspects of care for people of Aboriginal background? Is that your experience, and does that translate into things like respect to not naming people, to burning ceremonies or sweeping ceremonies, to allow for the spirit to sort of pass?
So most Aboriginal people don't want to die in a hospital. I'm not sure I've met any Aboriginal people who want to die in a hospital, and an element of that comes back to our spirituality, because we know that if you pass here, your spirit might get stuck here, and that if other people have passed before us, their spirit may already be there. If you're going to be admitted onto an oncology ward, chances are the bed you sleep in or you lay in, somebody's died in it before you. And all of that stuff comes into play for an Aboriginal person when they're thinking about the spirit, and the spirit being, captured, I guess, one for a better word. So if an Aboriginal person has to die in hospital, or hospital is something that they will have to do, if that kind of makes sense, because maybe there's no family support, or the family just don't have the right setup or can't afford it, that sort of stuff, then they may request to have the room smoked or swept or things like that. Can that happen? Well, yes and no. My experience is if the requests are early enough. I've been part of the Northern Hospital where a friend passed away in the oncology ward, and her final request was, don't let my spirit here smoke that room out. And the hospital said that's fine. There are some safety issues you need to know about. The windows don't open. The smoke alarms will have to be turned off, so that just for that part of the ward, so that they don't set off and disrupt everybody. And there's a cost to that. So the cost was the biggest thing. I think it was about $1,500, and the organisation the lady worked for paid for that, because that was their contribution to giving her some dignity in dying. They were a health organisation, and so they paid for it. And I was there when it happened, like when she passed, and they brought the lady that was doing the smoking was already there, because she was a very, very close friend, and she kept having to wet the leaves because they kept drying out, and when she did it, and I laugh because this lady, her final request was the smoking, but actually she's a real funny lady, played tricks, and I reckon part of it was to get her brothers and sisters back. So her request was that they all have to be present in the room before it took place, and I laugh because you can hear them. They was all in there choking because, the windows don't open. So it was a little bit funny because, but that's where I'm going. So most people will want to die in home, but if they can't, they may have those requests. And if those requests are not reasonable, they're conversations that you just have to have with the family, and allow them to choose what they do with that in the conversation they have with the person who's passing on. They may choose to say, yes, that will happen, knowing that it won't, if that kind of makes sense and gives them a little bit of peace. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. Now it's last call. It's been a great opportunity to have you speak to us, Nicole. It's a great opportunity to be enlightened and informed. It's always a great opportunity to meet people that are able to connect and help us understand the sort of heritage of not all Aboriginal people, but the Aboriginal people that you understand and know and acknowledge, and particularly the work then that you do with not only adults and healthcare professionals, but the children that you're helping to kind of enculturate into this space as well. So thank you this afternoon. I think we've got a gift which isn't the water jug, but it's something that might resemble that. So
Thank you
very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.